Hello, I wanted to create a video that shows how to use some of our basic theory and fundamentals to explore and even teach ourselves new scales. Okay. Now, the first thing is just getting orientated in the chromatic alphabet and how it works on your instrument. Now, most have a 4-string bass. I have a 5-string bass here, so I'm only going to be playing on the E, A, D, and G strings. So try and just imagine this string is not there. Okay. So the chromatic scale, if you well, first you want to know the names of your strings, and the intervals between the strings and notes we'll find are a little bit more important than the notes themselves. So a good way to remember it is that you start on your low E string here, and it's a fourth up to the next string. Next string is A, so you got E, F, G, A. So that's what we mean by a fourth, just 4 notes alphabetically to the next. And then we have a fourth from the A to the D. A, B, C, D. And then we have a fourth from the D to the G. D, E, F, G. So it's set up like that if you're thinking from the low notes or the lower tones to the higher tones or strings. If you're going backwards or down from the higher strings to the lower strings, you are going to have an interval of a fifth. From D to or from G to D, you have a fifth, which is G, A, B, C, D, and it'll work the same for the names of the strings. So once you kind of get the names of the strings down, then you can kind of have a relativity for where each string starts in the chromatic musical alphabet. Okay, so if this is our low E, remember our chromatic musical alphabet has a whole step between every natural note just being the A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's a whole step between every natural note except between the B and the C and the E and the F. So if you just remember that, you can kind of guide yourself through it. If we're starting at the E, remember there's only a half step between the E to the F. And every fret is going to be a half step away from the next or the previous. So in our chromatic alphabet, if this is E, then the first fret is going to be the F. Then you have F sharp, then you have G, then you have G sharp, and then lo and behold, the next string is our A. You have A sharp, then you have B, you have C. Remember, B and C are just like E and F, so B to C is only a half step. Then you have C sharp, and lo and behold, the next string is our open D string. And then you have your D sharp, then you're back at E, half step to the F sharp, F, then you have your F sharp, and then you have your open G string. Then you have your G sharp, A sharp, and G. We got our D or G sharp, A sharp, and then you have your B. Okay. Now going backwards, you have B, and I usually just call them flats as I'm going down. If I'm going up the chromatic scale, I'll just refer to them as sharps. But remember, the sharp and flat versions of notes are just 2 different names for the same tone. just depends on what relativity you're thinking of in terms of what key you're in. Okay, and we'll study more about keys once we learn to spell our scales within one position. And you can, and the whole point of this is to get an orientation so you can find notes once you teach yourself how to spell scales. Okay, so, and you're going to use the chromatic alphabet to spell scales. So, like, take for example the C major scale. We have if you're starting at C, you just got to find your lowest C in that first position. And remember, we're just looking for notes within the first 4 frets and prioritizing the open strings just to play the scales in the first position, or what I like to refer to as the open position, because you'll be using those open strings. So if we look for our lowest C, it's probably going to be, I mean, if we start from the E string, the low E string, then we're already past C in the alphabet, right? So why not try and look for it on our A string? A sharp, B, and C. So we have our 3rd fret on the A string as our first note in the scale. And now, if we know that the key signature, now a key signature is how many sharps or flats a scale has, okay? In C major, they're all natural notes. So we're basically just going through the chromatic scale and looking to identify where every natural note is, starting from C. So this would be C sharp or D flat, right? That's not a natural note. So we go on to the next string, which is our D. That's a natural note. D sharp, not a natural note. E is a natural note. Then you have a half step to our F, which is also a natural note. And then you have the whole step to our G, which is also an open string, so you want to prioritize that. You could reach up to the 5th fret, but again, that's out of the first position, and we want to prioritize open strings for right now. So we have our G, and then our A. Now here we're going to move up just to finish the octave. And an octave is one full range of notes, right? So if we're starting from C here, D, E, F, G, then we're going to have to move to the 2nd position to play our A. Then a whole step to the B, and then you have your C here, which is the end of the scale. Okay, the first octave. So the whole scale okay, and remember, what goes up must come down. And you want to make sure, because our muscle memory is going to learn positions based by, sticking in that position and just getting used to which fingers are going to be used for which notes. So within the first position, the 3rd finger will always be on the 3rd, any notes within the 3rd fret. When we move to that 2nd position to play the last part of the octave, or the higher part of the scale, the last part of the scale, we want to shift to that 2nd position so we can use our 1, 3, and 4 to finish the scale. So, and again, what goes down must come up, or what goes up must come down, rather. So right there, when you play that open G, you're going to shift back to that 1st position. And in our practice, we want to make sure that we can evenly and slowly play it all the way through. And remember to go up and down twice so you can practice the direction change on the bottom of the scale as well as on the top. Okay, and keep in mind when I say bottom or top, I'm referring to tonal order, and we want to make sure that we get used to thinking in this tonal order rather than how things are set up on the instrument. That'll help us really get orientated in each position of the instrument. So now that we kind of reviewed the spelling process and how the chromatic scale works on the instrument, now we want to kind of challenge ourselves by spelling another scale. Let's say we want to spell our G scale. If we just know that the C major scale is all natural notes and we know how to find them, we can look at the intervals between each of the notes. And that'll give us the formula for any major scale, no matter where you start in the chromatic alphabet. Okay, so C to B is going to be a whole step. C to D will be a whole step. D to E will be a whole step. Again, E and F will be a half step. F to G is a whole step. G to A is a whole step. A to B is a whole step. And then B to C is a half step. So, when we're thinking about what that all equates to, you have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? So if we apply that starting at G in the chromatic alphabet, okay, and while you're watching this, if you want to use a pen and paper, it's usually best to it helps you keep track of where you are in the thought process when you're trying to teach yourself this stuff. Okay, so where were we? We were spelling G major using the intervallic pattern that we found from C major. Okay, so if we start at G major in the chromatic alphabet, or G, the letter G in the chromatic alphabet, if we apply our whole steps, we'll have G, our first whole step. Remember our pattern from the C major, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So the first whole step takes us from G to A. Okay, now a lot of people will play G and be like, okay, whole step. But there's no interval there. You haven't gone anywhere. That's just where you're starting. Okay, so remember, you're starting at G, applying the first whole step of the intervallic pattern brings you to A. Apply the second whole step of the intervallic pattern brings you to B, and then you have your half step of the intervallic pattern, which brings you from B to C. And then you have the set of 3 whole steps, because remember it's 2 whole steps, a half step, then 3 whole steps, right? So we're on the first of the group of 3 whole steps. That's one of the challenges, keeping track where you are in the intervallic pattern and where you are in the chromatic alphabet. This is why it helps to kind of write it down and kind of follow your thought process visually as you kind of go through this stuff. But anyway, so we've done whole step, and a half step so far. So we have 3 more whole steps to go. And we're on C, right? Now, our first of the grouping of 3 whole steps is going to bring us to D. Our second of the grouping of 3 whole steps will bring us to E. And then we have, this is where it kind of gets a little tricky, right? Because E and F are just like B and C in the chromatic alphabet. They're only a half step apart. But we want to apply our third whole step, right? So our third whole step, if we're on E, is going to bring us past F and bring us to F sharp, okay? So F sharp, and then you have your half step, which is the last interval of your intervallic pattern that brings you back to G, okay? And that's a way to double check yourself. If you don't end up on the same letter that you started from, the root note, then you know that you've either made a mistake intervallically, either alphabetically or intervallically. Okay, so now, if we look at what we've done, we've outlined G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G, right? So now we go to our instrument, and we say, okay, what string is best to find the G on? Now you might think the open G string, right? But that's that's one of our higher strings, and we'll be playing on one string if we want to outline the pattern or the scale. So you want to find, again, remember, for right now in the first position, you always want to find the lowest note. So G, okay? So we think our low E string isn't too far away from G, and it's behind G in the alphabet, right? So if we start there, we got E, half step to F, whole step, or half step to F sharp, and then a half step to G. So we'll start there on our fourth string, starting on the third fret with our third finger. So we have our G, and now a whole step would bring us to the fifth fret if we wanted to stay on the same string. But we want to just play the A with the open A string. So G, A, and then a whole step to B, half step to C, whole step to D, open D string, and then you have your whole step to E. And now we're going to have a whole step to our F sharp, and then G. Okay, so really the only thing different from the C scale is that we're including the lower notes of the C scale, but the only difference between G major and C major is that F sharp. So for right now, that kind of gives you just a review of how to spell scales in your head, figure them out with your theory, and then learn to apply them to